Welcome to Keiser Voices, the story of success, brought to you by Keiser University Graduate School, here where the academic world meets personal triumph. Join us today as we dive into the captivating tales of success.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Robin Cash, and I am the program director for the Applied Engineering program with Keiser Online Campus. I am a native Detroiter, and I worked for over 32 years for Ford Motor Company, where in the latter part of my career, I led core powertrain cooling globally. I have an undergraduate from Michigan and a master from Wayne State University, both in mechanical engineering, and a PhD from the Michigan Technological University in Houghton, Michigan. So Michiganier through and through. My husband, I've been married for over 30 years, and we are the parents of 3 children. We split our time between Detroit, Michigan, and Wellington, Florida. And I really enjoy lifting up underrepresented minorities in the STEM space. And aside from that, we're just avid travelers, and I intend to hit everywhere on my bucket list. And this most recent trip, I had the great pleasure of visiting Egypt, which was something that I don't believe any engineer should, that especially a practicing or retired engineer should miss. So that was one of the greatest adventures I've experienced. So let's think about the historical context and evolution of African Americans in leadership in education. And when I say education, I'm specifically referring to higher education, historically in the United States. The African Americans' plight is well known, and over the last several hundred years, there's been a lot of different things that has happened historically. But I'd like to start with the establishment of historically Black colleges and universities, referred to as HBCUs, and what a vital role it played in the space of African Americans in higher education, and not only African Americans, but in underrepresented minorities. For an example, when we look at HBCUs, not only African American, but there were a huge population of Native Americans that if you look through the historical archives of these HBCUs, you'll see many also that were not a part of the majority universities. And I'd like to give a really interesting statistics, but then something more personal. Now, as reported by the American Council on Education, they highlighted that while the number of African American colleges and university presidents have increased, there is still a need for greater representation, with their fully less than 9% of presidents identify as African American. Now, this is an important statistic because when you look at the overall population of African Americans in the United States, or represented in the global market, and the number that are graduating, we see that that's at a significant deficiency. And I'll explain a little bit what I mean by that, especially coming from the University of Michigan. And all 3 of the universities I attended were majority universities. And it's very difficult to see yourself as being capable and to achieve a very difficult technical degree if there's no one that really looks like you, not by, when you look in the mirror and you see a woman, for an example, and you see a woman of color, and you don't see anyone that looks like you, it's very hard to visualize yourself being successful. And even further, if I think about in the context of HBCUs and providing higher education for underrepresented minorities, when my parents, which is just one generation ago, that both grew up in the South, the type of education they could get up through their high school certificates say training school. So if you think about this, if my mother, for an example, wanted to apply to a majority university or college, and you don't have a high school diploma, you have a high school certificate that you were trained. And this is very significant language. You would not be qualified or eligible to go to a university at that time, not only because of the segregation that was in place, but because you weren't qualified because you did not have a high school diploma. So it's very important that we understand the significance of historically Black colleges and universities that bridge that gap, and then providing a gateway for those people that were able to get that education. For an example, everyone knows Booker T. Washington for the most part, and how he started Hampton University, and many people graduated from there. And if you look down through some of the most highly educated African Americans in the history, many of them started at an HBCU. But what's even more important is, for me, and for every individual, for every human, we have unintentional bias. And I have to recognize that in myself as well. It's not just someone that's different than me. It's everyone has this unintentional bias. We tend to gather with people that we feel most comfortable with, and those are people that we're most familiar with, the cultures that we're most familiar with. And that's the case. If I'm from Detroit, and I'm from a city, not rural, and I'm from it's more fast-paced. And when I go somewhere and I see people from, let's say, very small towns in southern states, you'll see the natural progression of segregation of those people, even within your own culture, within your own race, I should say. So it's not something that you specifically mean to do, which is why I say it's unintentional. I say that to lift up the point that if only 9% of presidents identify as African American descent, there is a forced unintentional bias to how faculties are appointed, how often they reach tenure, and how often they are elevated to spots of leadership. And I'll touch on that a little bit more in subsequent prompts. And if we look at inclusion of curricula, I want to lift up a statistic from the American Association of Colleges and Universities, where statistics show an increase in African Americans earning degrees in various fields and contributing to a more diverse academic landscape. But what I'd like to lift up is I came up in the automotive industry, and my background and my career was over the more than 32 years was in automotive. And then you have fields like Procter & Gamble and products, or Pratt Whitney or Raytheon, or that dealt more in aerospace. It's really, and if there's a physical presence, you have the ability to look at what's happening and try to direct and be intentional on how you're creating a more diverse and a more level playing field for everyone, not just African Americans, but underrepresented minorities in that space. But what I'd like to lift up is, as we continue to grow technologically and we talk about tech and innovation, I mean, we think about things like AI and data modeling, and those people that are in that field of innovation. And we think about the built-in bias that can affect how my data is modeled, or how I receive data and how someone else receives data. And let me unpack that a little bit. If I, an African American woman, has any unintentional bias or intentional bias as I'm coding, it's in the code, and AI grows with that bias already implanted in it. It can create all kinds of unintentional or intentional bias as we use AI. And an example of that and the same is applicable with data modeling. Let me give you an example. If there is face recognition software that the people who are programming that has some unintentional bias or intentional bias against people, as they're coding and as that AI matures and as that AI grows, and I don't know the exact statistics, but there has been data to suggest that the treatment of people that are minority people is very different than that of the people that are actually coding that, because it's built into the code. So, and as it evolves, so does that bias evolve. So this is just something for us to think about when we think about inclusion and inclusion of curriculum and inclusion of the people that are creating the technology that shifts us forward into the next, into our next season of humanity. Now, there's a question about mentorship and support. Now, the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education reported in 2021 that African Americans are still unrepresented in faculty tenure and promotions, and they're emphasizing the importance of mentorship programs and career advancement. Now, I have a personal story with regards to this mentorship and support. As I matriculated through my PhD, I was awarded a KCP scholarship. And the KC, it's the King Parks Chavez Fellowship, which was specifically put in place to increase the number of African American and Latina Hispanic people with higher education, so with PhDs in the STEM space, and so appropriately named. Now, going into the PhD program, and so there was no way the only way I knew about this is because a friend of a friend told me. So if we are going to be intentional, if we really want to be intentional, this kind of information should be very transparently available to the people that we're trying to affect change in. Now, this is even more interesting. So I satisfied my PhD requirements. I successfully defended my dissertation, and a part of the KPC fellowship was that I was to work in higher education at a university level for at least 2 years. It may have been 4. It was 2 or 4 years. Okay. I'm going to track because I don't want to be ambiguous. Part of the requirement post PhD was to spend a set amount of time teaching at a higher education institution. So I need to teach at a university level. I sent my resume, my CV, to every university in the Metro Detroit area. So that's U of D, that's University of Michigan Dearborn, that's Mercy, or UDM, University of Detroit Mercy, Wayne State, where I am an alum, and Oakland University. I did not hear back from one person. I didn't get an interview. I did work, however, for the Eastern Michigan University School of Engineering, and I still work there. But I'm not a full-time professor. The irony of it was that because I wasn't working full-time for a period of time and couldn't report teaching hours, the KCP group was going to convert my fellowship, was over $60,000, to a loan. The point that I'm making is, if we have programs in place that we need to make certain are available, we need to make certain that we're putting equal programs in place to facilitate this pipeline of emerging PhDs of underrepresented minorities in the STEM. And yes, through mentorship, people who are connected to the program, have a commitment to the program, and for those people that are going to sponsor, advise, coach, negotiate with past colleagues so that there is an opportunity for placement and career advancement. And most of us and all of us know that typically there's two ways to have to advance your career. And the most important, because you're credentialed and you're working, is to have a exceptional work ethic and deliver. So that's one. And the other element is to have both mentorship and sponsorship. And without those, without either one of those, your career will be halted. And especially if you have people that may have unintentional bias or intentional bias that are acting as what we've all referred to as a golden, or the glass ceiling, stopping you right where you are and not allowing you that advancement. We also understand that the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity has been working towards providing mentorship resources for underrepresented faculty, which will, for all intensive purposes, foster a sense of community, like a community work group of professional development, so that I'm able to leverage someone else's experiences and they are able to leverage mine as we collaborate on that community development. It's interesting also that this is very near and dear to me, because I personally think that I should have never had to go through so I'm going to take that out. It is imperative that this pipeline to university after completion and this mentorship is in place, because there statistically seem to be far less engineering professors, especially those of underrepresented minorities, that elevate to tenured professors. And that's something that we should really look at and understand, and look at the statistics around underrepresented minorities and majorities, and the statistics around how many really achieve tenure. And then you can slice it even further if you look at gender bias as well. Because I want to emphasize that diversity and inclusion has all kinds of, it's very deep. It's not just color. It's, of course, it does include race, but it also includes experiences. It includes where you grow up and how you were raised. There's vast differences between West Coast and East Coast in the United States and North and South. So remembering that diversity of thought, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of education and training experiences all lead to that inclusive environment that we all hopefully are striving for. And so finally, well, not finally, but if I look at further development of future development of student programs, the thing that is very interesting to me is data from the National Survey of Student Engagement indicates that African American students often engage in high impact practices such as research, community service, projects, contributing to a well-rounded and prepared workforce. However, if you look at the number of African Americans that ultimately that come out of that STEM space, and that's specifically the lane I'm staying in, that elevate to leaders of, to either technical leaders or delivery leaders, it just is very skewed. And so we have to, and we have lots of people that start in a technical or the STEM space, and they move off out to the softer skills because there's just no opportunity. There's less opportunity in the tech and that STEM space. Even though I'll come back to, they have engaged in internships, research projects, community service, contributing to well-rounded and prepared to be a well-rounded engineer and prepared for the workforce. And again, I circle back to mentorship and sponsorship. You can be prepared, you can work hard, but you have to have the mentorship and sponsorship. And that's where that's half of the work. The other half is to ensure that our underrepresented minority students are well prepared and supported as they come into a higher learning environment. The last thought I have on preparedness for underrepresented minorities and specifically African Americans is when I go into an academic setting and I'm the only person of color and often the only woman the only woman. And I don't see anyone that's successful that looks like me. It makes me feel very, it makes me feel that there's very little chance that I'd ever be successful in this space. Now, I've had some personal experiences, like for an example, one of my professors pulled me to the side and said, you should really consider changing your field to education, like teaching. She was talking about like teaching first or second graders. And I thought it was interesting because he didn't know me. He never took the time to know me. He was just implying that there's no way I can make it through that curriculum. So you have someone dropping that seed that that you're incapable of being successful. The other thing experience that I have, and this is why I think it's so important to have faculty members that are sensitive to, and I'm very sensitive to say underrepresented minorities, because while we're lifting up African American history, it's really important to understand that this is bigger than, it's very important. I am an African American and I'm very passionate about lifting African American students in the STEM But we must not forget that there's a large group of underrepresented minorities that I'm sure have very similar stories. At U of M, okay, I'm not going to call them out. When I was an undergraduate, I often was not in a lab group. So the professor would say, break into lab groups, and no one wanted to work with me. So I often had to do the labs on my own, and then leverage my dorm mates to come back and finish labs with me. Now this does two things to a student. You feel like you're less than, and you don't learn how to collaborate with it's harder to learn to collaborate with your peer group, those people that you're going to be working with. But it also tells you that your professors don't care about you. If you see someone sitting without a lab partner and going from group to group and being turned away, you have either an intentional or unintentional bias against that for whatever reason. And that was often my experience in undergraduate. However, for me as a professor in a STEM space, I would, because of my level of sensitivity to those kinds of things, I would never allow a student to be left out. In fact, I assign labs for that very reason, because I never want, so if you're sensitized to a particular difficulty, then you can help mitigate those kinds of issues in the classroom and as you move up in the academic community. The other thing is for a African American with no one that I can go to that I think can relate to me and talk to. So if I'm having a personal problem. And so when we think about students, and we think about a student like myself attending a majority university where I have no one that I think I can go and talk to if I'm having a problem or if I'm having difficulties, and I have no mentor group, adults, professors that are vested in the success of all of their students, not just a collection of their students, then I would probably either transfer or drop out. And let me give you some specific examples. Every group of community of people have different issues. If I'm in an area where there's no one that can do my hair, or young men, there's not a barber that would deal with African American hair, then hair textures, or if there are other issues that are going on, maybe I just don't have quite enough money to get to the next week because I'm a first generation college student and my parents are just doing everything they can do, but they just don't have anything else. There should be people from that cultural experience immersed in the problem solving for that group of individuals. And I think that was one of the biggest problems that I found in going to a university, that the people just don't see you, and in fact they see you as an annoyance. So it's important that we understand. Now these are all the things that you think are important. However, on the other side, we know through lots of data, we know through a great amount of research and data that there are people who contribute to, and not just, and I'll be specific again, there are African American people, technical leaders, and a lot of us know many of them, like Dr. Ben Carson, that was the first that conducted the first open heart surgery and that's just one example of many that are thought leaders, technology pioneers, without them, things would have been much different. And that's continuously going to be the case. Our technological future depends on our entire community of people. It's not just one group of people that should contribute to the world's technology. And so it's very important to me that we tap into all of the intellectual property and the brain trust of all people. And as we are in the middle or at the very beginning of the African American History Month that celebrates African Americans and their contribution to our world and to the United States, I think it's very important to remember that we all should have a vested interest in doing something that's going to elevate the advancement of inclusion, and so that we have the right number, so we have fully represented in everything that we do. And I'd also like to say, as we stop and pause and think about African American history, that's great. But it should not be just for February. We should have a consciousness all year, and I'll come back to that's all underrepresented minorities. As I was working on my PhD, one of the things, because of my experiences with what I thought the disparity and how I was dismissed and treated during undergraduate, I wanted to teach. And I had this thought in my head. And so I got an opportunity to teach, and I was teaching heat transfer. And I went to the class, and I sat in the front seat like I always did. And sure enough, just like it had been in all my years of undergraduate, no one would sit next to me. There was always at least one or two seats at least one seat on either side, and the room would fill up, and I would sit there by myself. And then the chairman of the department came in and introduced me, and I got up and went to the front of the room. And she's the professor. So, and my initial thought was, and there has been very few women, but there have been some. And they all come up to me and say how happy they are because I can relate to them. And it's not just African American women, it's just women in general. And my initial thought was, I'll show the men and the people who have treated me so poorly that that I know more than them and I'm teaching them, so then I would feel some redemption in some way. And I quickly learned that I can be a part of a solution. Because if I can influence how people feel and respect African American women in a very, very technical space, then I can change one heart and one mind, one person at a time. And so that's a part of being a mentor. So as an African American professor I teach a very technical subject, every student that I have, I am a mentor. And as I elevate to program director, I am an even bigger mentor. And as I elevate to, say, associate dean or department chair or dean, I'm an even bigger influencer, because when they come to me, I am able to support them. And so as they go into industry, their heart is changed, and maybe they become more inclusive with their thoughts and their ability to work with their peer groups, that are everyone in their peer group, not the ones that just look and think like them. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you for journeying with us today on Keiser Voices, the story of success. As we close this chapter, remember, every story has its next page.